Let me ask you a question. What team went on the greatest postseason run of all time? Who would you say? Maybe the 2001 Lakers with their near-perfect 15-1 postseason record, only losing one game in overtime against the 76ers. Maybe you would say the 2017 Warriors, who also had a near-perfect 16-1 record. Maybe you would say the 2016 Cavs, from coming back 3-1 against the greatest regular season team of all time. Maybe you would say the 2011 Dallas Mavericks, based on their sheer difficulty of teams they had to go through. Or maybe you would even say the 2023 Miami Heat, an 8 seed who somehow found their way in the NBA Finals. Well, what if I told you that I created a system that could calculate how great each playoff run was? A system that factored in winning, competition, and sheer dominance. Would you believe me? The 2017 Warriors put the championship destination on cruise control, and it didn't even seem like it was remotely challenging. They started off by cruising through the Damian Lillard Trailblazers, an easy 4-game sweep. Then they matched up against the Utah Jazz with Gordon Hayward and Rudy Gobert, and it wasn't even close either, another 4-game sweep. In the conference finals, they were set to play against the 61-21 San Antonio Spurs, but Kawhi Leonard, being Kawhi Leonard, got injured, so the Warriors won in 4 games. In the NBA Finals, they were set to play against the Cleveland Cavs, and despite choking a 3-1 lead the year prior, the Cavs really stood no chance this time around. Cleveland, despite having LeBron, Kyrie, and Kevin Love all healthy, the Warriors gentlemen swept them. This caps off one of the most dominant playoff runs we've ever seen. The Warriors went 16-1 in the 2017 postseason, giving them the greatest record of all time. But for every one of these occasions, we also have a playoff run like the 2008 Celtics, the only team in NBA history to win the finals while having double-digit playoff losses. The team who almost lost in the first round and then made the same mistake and almost lost in the second round. While the 2017 Warriors made the playoffs look like a piece of cake, the 2008 Celtics made it look like the hardest thing a group of human beings could do. It started off in the first round, where the Big Three Celtics played against the 8-seed Atlanta Hawks, led by Joe Johnson, Josh Smith, and Al Horford. The first 6 games of this series resulted in the home team winning every game, and in a winner-takes-all Game 7, the Hawks laid a goose egg, losing 65-99. Fast forward to the second round against the LeBron Cavs, where the same exact thing happened before. In the first 6 games, the home team won every time, but in Game 7, the Celtics won in a nail-biter 97-92 victory, despite LeBron putting up 45 points in this game. The conference finals was against the Detroit Pistons, led by Rip Hamilton and Chauncey Billups, and the Celtics won in 6 games. Finally, in the NBA Finals, the Celtics were matched up against the Lakers, and they once again took this series in 6 games. The Celtics in this playoff run had a 16-10 record, putting them as the second worst championship record of all time. So we just looked at both ends of the spectrum, complete playoff dominance, and barely winning the finals. But where does everyone else rank? Well, if we plot every postseason run on a chart based purely on record, it would look a little something like this. Based on purely win percentage in the postseason, the 2017 Warriors are right here, and just slightly behind them are the 2001 Lakers, slightly left, who had a 15-1 record. The 2008 Celtics are all the way down here, but they're not even the worst playoff run ever. When we look towards the left of this chart, it really exposes the Bill Russell Celtics championships, where they weren't as dominant as most people would think. These are Bill Russell's rings. The Lakers and Celtics in the 80s are really a mixed bag. Magic and Bird have some of the most and least impressive postseason records of all time. The 1986 Celtics championship was the 9th best win rate in NBA history postseason, going 15-3, and the 1982 championship from the Lakers was the 8th best, going 12-2. This is where Larry Bird's rings are, and this is where Magic Johnson's rings are. Michael Jordan in the 90s had a very impressive ring collection, having 4 championships in the top 20 in terms of record. This is what they look like. Kobe and Shaq also had some very impressive runs in the early 2000s right here, and Kobe's rings with power also right here. LeBron's rings are pretty middle of the road in terms of win rate, his best being that 2016 run with a 16-5 record. And in recent times, besides the 2017 Warriors, the 2023 Nuggets had the best postseason record in current times, with an impressive 16-4 record. So does this mean that the 2017 Warriors have the best playoff run of all time? Well, I think we're forgetting about something crucial to factor in. Cakewalk, an absurdly or surprisingly easy task, or achieve or win something easily. This is what your championship run gets called when you play against weak competition. Factoring in playoff competition into this equation is huge when looking at all-time playoff runs. What's a championship without a little challenge along the way? The 1972 Los Angeles Lakers, with Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain, might arguably have the most challenging postseason run of all time. They first had to play against the 57-25 Chicago Bulls, led by Bob Love, Chet Walker, and Jerry Sloan, a very good team. After sweeping them, they had to play against the former reigning NBA champs in the Western Conference Finals, the Milwaukee Bucks, led by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. After winning that series in 6, they had to play against the Knicks, who were the NBA champions the year before the Bucks, but the Lakers won in 6. If you don't think this one's impressive, looking more into recent times, the 2011 Dallas Mavericks might have had the most difficult path to a championship ever. They first had to beat the LaMarcus Aldridge Trailblazers in the first round, beating them in 6. Then they had to play against the former NBA champions in the second round, who they swept. Yeah, Dirk was destined to get this ring. In the conference finals, they played against the baby Big Three in OKC, who they beat in 5 games. And in the finals, you guys already know what happened here. After going down 2-1 to the LeBron, D-Wade, and Chris Bosh Heat, Dirk turned the notch up a little bit. So where does the difficulty of these playoff runs compare to the rest of NBA history? Well, we actually have an objective way to track this playoff competition. The NBA has a stat called SRS score, or simple rating system. The stat calculates the weight of a team based on margin of victory and strength of schedule. So what if we found the average SRS score of each team the eventual champion played against during the playoffs? Who would have the most challenging postseason run? Well, like we talked about, the 1972 Lakers have by far one of the hardest paths to get to a ring in the history of the NBA, almost going off the chart. Slightly behind them are the 1973 New York Knicks, the 1995 Houston Rockets, who won the third most difficult ring, and the hardest after the merger. They had to battle against the Malone and Stockton Jazz, the Charles Barkley Suns, the David Robinson Spurs, and the Penny and Shaq Magic in the finals. A heck of a run. The Kobe and Shaq Lakers 3 rings were all within the top 20 of hardest rings to win in NBA history, 2 of them within the top 8. Looking at the opposite of this, the 2023 Denver Nuggets statistically had the easiest path to a ring in NBA history. I mean, is it really a surprise? They played against 3 play-in teams in that run. Many of the Bill Russell championships were also historically easy. Along with that, many of the Larry Bird and Magic Johnson rings were relatively easy. Here's Magic's, and here are Bird's. Michael Jordan relatively had challenging championships. This is what they look like. We already talked about Kobe's first 3. Tim Duncan had above average competition for most of his collection. LeBron's rings, besides his 2016 one, were relatively easy. The Curry Warriors, contrary to popular belief, actually played against some decent competition, especially in that 2022 run and in 2017. But I think there's still one more thing we're forgetting about, something very important. So we've looked at playoff record, we've looked at playoff competition, so what's left? Well, how about we look at how much or little you beat your competition by? Margin of victory is something very important to factor in. The 2001 Lakers went on a rampage in that postseason and showed no mercy towards their competition. The 2001 Lakers started off their journey playing against the Portland Trailblazers, led by Steve Smith and Damon Stoudemire. The Lakers swept the Blazers in 3. LA on average outscored the Blazers 103.7 to 89 this series, so they were 14.7 points better on average. Moving on to the second round against the Kings versus Chris Webber and Peja Stojakovic, they once again swept their opponent. The Lakers on average outscored the Kings by 9.2 points, 106.5 to 97.3. Moving on to the 1 seed against the San Antonio Spurs in the conference finals, the Lakers got their 3rd sweep in a row, beating the Spurs on average by a whopping 22.2 points. The average score of the game in this series was around 103 to 81. And finally in the NBA Finals, where Allen Iverson was doing everything in his power to carry the 76ers, But it wasn't enough, losing in 5 games. The average margin of victory in this series was 6.8, so around a 101-94 score, which is actually the closest of any series during this run. The average margin of victory of the Lakers in this playoff run was around 13.2, but if we convert that into net rating, which is like margin of victory, but it's standardized for 100 possessions, so it adjusts for different eras, their net rating is 13.8, which actually ranks the 2001 Lakers as the highest of all time in this field. Not only were the 2001 Lakers sweeping these teams with ease, but they were also beating the shit out of them. The 2017 Warriors are right around the corner with a net rating of 13.5. The 1991 Bulls are also right up here with a rating of 13.2. The 1971 Bucks with Oscar Robertson and Kareem are slept on, a net rating of 13.4. The 60 Celtics get exposed on this chart for having some of the worst net ratings in NBA history to win a championship. Russell's rings are right here. Besides the 71 Bucks, many of these teams in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were relatively weak in this category. But in the late 80s, the 90s, and early 2000s, we saw many more dominant teams poke their heads out. The 85 Lakers, 86 Celtics, and 87 Lakers are all right here. The 2 Pistons teams are right here also, pretty impressive. Michael Jordan and the Bulls had a pretty impressive 6 rings, all with relatively above average net rating. And besides the 2001 Lakers and the 2017 Warriors, not a lot stands out here. The Duncan Spurs had some impressive runs, especially in 1999 and 2014. This is what his best runs look like. LeBron James actually has some pretty good runs with the Heat and Cavs. Besides 2022, the 2010s Warriors were just flat out dominating teams. Curry's rings are right here. So now that we've looked at all of the 3 main factors in determining the magnitude of a playoff run, who had the best run? So after looking at playoff competition, playoff record, and overall margin of victory, I think we have enough information to make a claim here. And we're going to do this by adding up the ranks of each category. So for example, the 2023 Denver Nuggets had the 16th best record at 16-4. They had the dead last competition rank at 64th place, so they played against the worst competition. And they had the 14th best net rating. Because there are 64 championship winning teams from 1960 until 2023, the team that takes first place in a category is rewarded with 64 points. Second gets 63 points, third gets 62 points, and so on until the eventual 64th place gets 1 point. The team with the most amount of points will be crowned as having the greatest postseason run ever. And after doing all the math of adding up the ranks of each and every one of these 64 champions, I came up with something that looks like this. According to the numbers, the 2001 Los Angeles Lakers had the greatest postseason run of all time, with 185 points, slightly followed up by the 2017 Golden State Warriors with 173 points. The 01 Lakers had the second best record at 15-1, played against the 4th hardest competition of any playoff run, and had the highest playoff net rating of all time. The 2017 Warriors with Steph, Clay, Draymond, and KD were close seconds. They had the best playoff record at 16-1 and the second best net rating. But what holds this team back was the competition they played against. While it was above average compared to the rest of the teams, it was weaker than the 01 Lakers. Third place is the iconic 1996 Bulls. They had 156 points. They had the 11th best postseason record at 15-3 and had the 5th best net rating at 12.1, but their playoff competition holds them back. And this isn't the only time MJ appears on here, because in the top 10, he appears 4 times. 3rd at 1996, 7th place at 1997, 9th place in 1993, and 10th place in 1991. The 2016 Cavs come in at 4th place. The year they came back 3-1 against the Warriors in the finals. They had the 10th best playoff competition and net rating, but their 16-5 record holds them back from any higher spots. I was really surprised to see the Bad Boy Pistons snag a top 10 spot. In 1989, they had a playoff record of 15-2 and a net rating of 8.7, finishing with 144 total points. Now, looking at every championship run since 1960, something that I immediately thought of when looking at this is which era dominated. And it was pretty clear that the 2010s had by far some of the best championship runs of all time, with the 2017 Warriors, 2016 Cavs, 2011 Mavericks and 2014 Spurs. The 1990s, I thought, had the second best decade for championship runs, mostly dominated by the Jordan Bulls, but we also see the 99 Spurs make an appearance near the top. The 80s was the third best decade for championship runs. They had teams like the 89 Pistons, the 83 76ers with Dr. J and Moses Malone, the 86 Celtics, and the 82 Lakers. The 2000s, I expected to be better. Besides the infamous 2001 Lakers, they have 0 other teams in the top third quadrant. The next best runs were the 02 Lakers, 09 Lakers, and 07 Spurs. The 1970s, besides having some good runs near the beginning of the decade, like the 71 Bucks with Kareem, the 72 Lakers with Wilt and Jerry West, and the 73 Knicks with Walt Frazier, there wasn't a lot from this time. And by far the worst decade in this metric was the 1960s. They had 6 of the bottom 10 playoff runs, and they only had 2 great playoff runs with the 64 Celtics and 61 Celtics. Finally, the 2020s has been slightly disappointing so far. The only runs that crack the top 30 are the 2022 Warriors and the 2023 Nuggets. Now, looking at the playoff runs from all-time great players is something that's really interesting to me, and I want to take a deeper look into this. When we look at Bill Russell's championships, 9 of the 11 I tracked, most of them were pretty below average. Besides the ones we just talked about in 1961 and 1964, most of them are pretty lackluster, relatively compared. Moving down the timeline with Magic in the 80s, he had some decent runs, his best being 1982, where the Lakers had a 12-2 record and finished with 122 points. However, he also had the second worst run of all time in 1988. Looking at his arch rival Larry Bird, his collection's a really mixed bag. His run in 1986 is an all-time great one, having a 15-3 record and having a net rating of 10.4, the 7th best of all time. Moving on to the next decade in the 90s, Michael Jordan was dominating in the postseason, having 4 runs in the top 10 all-time and 5 of his 6 championship runs within the top 15. The man just always came to play when the lights shined the brightest. Kobe Bryant, like Larry Bird, also has a mixed bag. Well, I'm not sure we can exactly call the first 3 rings his when he was playing with Shaq, but besides having the best playoff run of all time in 2001, 2002 and 2009 were decent runs, placing within the top 5, and 2000 and 2010 were below average. Looking at Kobe's Western Conference rival, Tim Duncan, he had a few bright moments on here also. Like his 2014 run with the Spurs, where he had a net rating of 10 while playing against the 9th best competition of all time. Or in 1999, where the Spurs had a 15-2 record with an 8.4 net rating. Looking at another one of Timmy D's rivals, LeBron James has an interesting collection. He has the 4th best run of all time with the 2016 Cavs. His 2012 run is also impressive, where he beat the Baby Big 3 in OKC, which was above average. And finally, looking at the light-skinned wonder himself, Steph Curry has a pretty good collection of Larry O'Brien trophies. He had his infamous 2017 run, followed by a back-to-back top 15 placement in 2018. And 2015 and 2020 were both within the top 30. So looking at this information on a chart, this is where every NBA championship playoff run places since 1960 in terms of playoff ranking. So the better the run, obviously the higher it's going to be on this chart. When looking at Bill Russell's collection, it's really quite underwhelming. Most of his rings place very low. Magic Johnson had a few decent runs, except that dreaded 1988 placement. Larry Bird is quite random, to be honest. He had one of his greatest runs ever in 1986 and one of his worst in 1984. Michael Jordan's rings are by far the most impressive of any all-time great on here. The way he dominated fierce competition is a marvel. Kobe is all over the place. Some unbeatable, some mediocre, and some not so great. Tim Duncan is a similar story. Some really good like 2014, and some mediocre like 2005. LeBron is a similar story, having runs like 2016, which are almost impossible to top, but also having runs like 2013, which are relatively unimpressive. And finally, Steph Curry, who has a very underrated collection of rings. No real blemishes on this chart. All of his runs were pretty solid. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. For more stuff like this, be sure to subscribe and like the video.